Hello, third grade, and welcome to lesson 3-6. Today we're going to talk about the associative property of multiplication, and that's a property we use when we're multiplying three or more numbers together. Let's go ahead and begin with our lesson video in just a moment as soon as it loads. Now, the associative property of multiplication is also called the grouping property. Now, what that means is that you can group things in different order when you're multiplying numbers. So that means you can pick any of the numbers that you want to multiply first, and then you will still get the same answer no matter which way you started. So let's take a look at this example question first before we jump in.
Gina has 2 quilts. Each quilt has 5 rows with 3 squares in each row. How many squares are in both quilts? Solve this problem any way you choose. Then, find another way to solve the problem.
Okay, so for this problem, they're telling us that she has 2 quilts, and we're seeing both of these underneath. Each one of them is 5 rows with 3 in each row. So each one of these is an array, a 5 times 3 array. So if we write that out, we know that our array is 5 times 3. But we know that there are 2 of them. So we know it's going to be 5 times 3 times 2 of these arrays to be able to find out how much she has altogether. Now, I can either do 5 times 3 plus 5 times 3 because they're the same size. So let's try that first. So we know 5 times 3 is 15. And another 5 times 3 is 15. And then I can say 15 plus 15 is equal to 30. Or I can do it the way that I was working on it on top. Now, what I did on top was I did the 5 times 3. So I'm going to group those. I'm going to use my parentheses to show that that's what I'm going to do first. 5 times 3, and then multiply whatever my product here is by 2. So I know 5 times 3 was 15. 15 times 2 is what gave me 30. So I found 2 different strategies. The first one, I was doubling. So I found the number of, the squares in the quilt for 1, and then I doubled it to find how many squares there are in both quilts by using addition. The first strategy I wrote on top is using just multiplication to be able to solve that way. So we found 2 different ways to be able to solve, to find out how many squares she has in both of her quilts. All right, so let's get into our short video lesson.
How can you multiply 3 numbers? Think about this question during the lesson. What does a row mean? In which direction does a row go? A row goes across. Look at the quilt sections in the picture. How many rows are there in each quilt section? There are 2 rows in each quilt section. How many factors are in this quilt example? There are 3 factors in this example. There are 3 sections, each containing 2 rows of 4 squares. Drew has to join 3 sections of a quilt. Each section has 2 rows with 4 squares in each row. How many squares in all are in these 3 sections? What are the 3 factors you should use? The 3 factors are 3, 2, and 4.
You can multiply to find the total for an array.
How do you think multiplying 3 factors will be different from multiplying 2 factors? When you multiply 3 factors, you will have to multiply twice. When you multiply 2 factors, you have to multiply only once. One way to solve this is to find 3 times 2 first. By grouping 3 times 2, you get 6 rows with 4 squares in each row. What is the answer?
Select your answer.
There are 24 squares in the quilt. Using this first method, what did you multiply to find the total number of rows? You multiply the 2 rows in each quilt section by 3 quilt pieces. After multiplying 2 by 3 to obtain 6 as the total number of rows, by what number do you multiply 6 in order to find the total number of squares? You multiply 6 rows by the 4 squares in each row. Another way to solve this is to compute 2 times 4 first. By grouping 2 times 4, you get 3 sections with 8 squares in each section. There are 24 squares in Drew's quilt pieces. Using this second method, what total did you find? When you multiply 2 times 4, you find the total number of squares in one quilt section. Then what total do you determine when you multiply 3 times 8? When you multiply 3 times 8, you determine the total number of squares in 3 quilt pieces. What property says that you can change the grouping of the factors and the product will be the same? The associative grouping property of multiplication says that you can change the grouping of the factors and the product will be the same. You know now how to multiply with 3 factors. How would you multiply 5 times 6 times 7? Try it yourself.
Okay, so let's take a look at their example over here. We've used the associative property of multiplication to show 2 different ways to find 5 times 2 times 3. Did you get the same answer both ways? What can you generalize? So let's take a look at these factors. If we have 5 times 2 times 3, we can either begin with 5 times 2. And then once we find the answer to that, we can multiply all of that by 3. So let's go ahead and solve. 5 times 2 we know is equal to 10. 10 times 3, or 10 groups of 3, we know will give us 30. So now let's try grouping it a different way. Instead of doing 5 times 2 first, let's try doing the 2 times 3 first. So we'll bring down the 5, and then we'll group 2 times 3 to find our answer. So since we haven't used the 5 yet, we're going to just drop that down. So 5 times whatever the product of 2 times 3 is. Now I know 2 times 3 is equal to 6. So 5 times 6 I know will also give me 30. Now I can take a look at this and I can see that my product for both of them is the same. My product of 5 times 6 ended up being 30. My product of 10 times 3 was also 30. I can generalize and say that I can group my factors. Remember, factors are the numbers that you multiply by each other. I can group my factors in any order and my product will always stay the same. And this is true because of the associative property of multiplication. Now, before we get into our guided practice, we are going to stop and take a look at some of our notes for this lesson. All right. Now, our notes for this lesson, for lesson 3-6. We are going to begin our notes on the associative property or the grouping property of multiplication. Now, the associative property says that you can change the grouping of the factors. Remember, the factors are the numbers that you're going to multiply, and your product will stay exactly the same. Now, an example that I gave you guys underneath were the numbers 2 times 4 times 5. Now, I may not know how to solve all that together. I'm going to use the associative property to start figuring it out. First, you need to decide what numbers you want to multiply first, and then you begin working. So I did it 2 different ways for you. First, I grouped 2 times 4 and started with that. And in the second example, I grouped 4 and 5 and started with that. So 2 times 4 gave me 8. 8 times 5, which was our third factor, gave me 40. Now I wanted to try it a different way to make sure that my work is correct. This time, I didn't start with the 2. I started with 4 and 5. So I did 2 times, and then I opened my parentheses. I wrote 4 times 5, and I closed my parentheses. These parentheses tell you that whatever is inside is what you're going to start with. It's what you're doing first. So I dropped my 2 times whatever my product is straight down, just like I did over here. And I did 4 times 5 first. So 4 times 5 gave me 20. 2 times 20 also gave me 40. So I can see that even after I switched my factors around, my product stayed the same. So no matter what order you multiply in, the associative property tells you that the product of your factors will stay the same no matter which factors you begin multiplying. All right, let's go ahead and get into our guided practice. Now for our guided practice for this lesson, we are going to be working on our first question. It says Sarah has 4 pages of stickers in an album. Each page has 3 rows with 2 stickers in each row. So she has 4 pages. Each page has stickers, it has 3 rows of stickers with 2 in each row. How many stickers are in Sarah's album? You may use objects to help. So remember what we talked about in class. Annotate your question. Circle the numbers, underline the question part so that you don't make any mistakes and so you don't forget anything. All right, so let's stop and think. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do 4 times 3 times 2? We need to decide which numbers we're going to start with. We're going to then figure out what number we need to multiply last. And in the question, it tells us that we can use objects if we need to. So let's go ahead and think about how we're going to do this. All right, so I'm going to begin multiplying, and I'm going to say that maybe I want to start with my 4 times 3. So I'm going to put my 4 times 3 in parentheses, and then the times 2 out here. Now I know 4 times 3 is equal to 12, and 12 times 2 is equal to 24. Now I also could have done it another way, and I could have done 4 times the product of 3 times 2. And I know that that's going to be, oops, no parentheses. 4 times 3 times 2 gives me 6. This 4 times 6 also gives me 24. So I was able to find my product 2 different ways. My number stayed the same, so I know my work is correct. Now for number 2, it says Billy concludes that the product of 2 times 3 times 5 is not equal to the product of, so let me draw this out for you. He's saying that 2 times 3 in parentheses times 5 is not equal to 2 times the product of 3 times 5. Is he correct? And then we need to explain why. So let's see. We know that these numbers are the same, 2 and 3 and 5, 2 and 3 and 5. Now we also know that our associative property tells us that we can group our factors in any order and our product is going to stay the same. That means I can pick any two numbers out of my three numbers here to multiply first, and then when I multiply by the third number, no matter which order I'm doing it, it stays the same. So we know 2 times 3 is equal to 6 times 5. So 6 times 5 is equal to 30. Now over here, he's doing 2 times 3 times 5 is 15. 2 times 15 is also equal to 30. So what I did first was I wrote out the problem part. Then I showed using my numbers how I'm going to disprove what he said. And then I can say he is incorrect because the associative property tells us that we can group factors in any order and the product stays the same. So you can see that I used my numbers to explain and I wrote out an explanation as well. So this shows what my answer was and I proved my answer using numbers and using facts. Now, moving on to numbers 3, all the way up until number 6. So I'm going to take my paper, I'm going to flip it over to the back side, and we're going to continue working. Now for number 3, it gives us the numbers and it asks us to fill in the missing numbers. So the first one says 2 times, and then we open our parentheses, 4 times 2 is equal to 2 times 4 times our missing number. Now we know that if these are our numbers that we're working with in the beginning, 2 and 4 and 2, they have to match on this side. So this is going to be 2 and 4 and then another 2. So this is telling us that no matter which numbers we're grouping first, our product is going to remain the same no matter what. Number 4, we have 3 times in parentheses, or whoops, in parentheses, we have 3 times 4 times another 3 is equal to 3 times something times 3. Now over here, same deal. We're going to take a look at our numbers. Our numbers in the beginning were 3 and 4 and 3. So our numbers on this side of the equal sign need to be the same, 3 and 4 and 3. So either I started with these two numbers or I started with these numbers. It doesn't matter. My product will still remain the same. Okay, for number 5, we have 2 times in parentheses 2 times 3. And on this side, we have in parentheses 2 times 2 times our missing number. So over here, if we have 2 and 2 and 3, on this side, we need to have 2 and 2 and 3. For number 6, we have 3 times 2 in parentheses times 4 on the outside. Whoops, sorry guys. Correct that quickly. This is why I have you guys write in pencil, because you guys can erase. So 3 times 2 times 4. On this side, we have a number times in parentheses 2 times 4. So remember, we know that our numbers need to match on both sides. If we have 3, 2, 4 over here, we have something, and then 2, 4. We know the number that was missing was the 3. So this side is always going to be equal to this side. And we can figure that out, and we can prove that by doing the math. So if we know 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16 for this side over here, 2 times 4 again is 8, 8 times 2 is 16 on this side. 3 times 4 times 3, we know 3 times 4 is 12, 12 times 3, 12, 24, 36. Over here, 4 times 3 is 12, times 3 is 36. Over here we have 2 times 3 is 6, times 2 is 12. Over we have 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 3 is also 12. And for our last example, 3 times 2 gives us 6, 6 times 4 is 24. Over here, 2 times 4 is 8, 8 times 3 is also equal to 24. So your numbers are always going to check out if you're doing your math correctly and if you're using your correct math facts. That's it for this lesson, 3rd grade. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.